Okay, welcome everybody. Thrilled to have you guys here in the room and on Zoom. As usual, on Zoom, we are in webinar format. So what this means is microphones are muted just to keep everything respectful, but you can still answer questions using the Q&A button provided. And then we'll also have, after an action-packed talk, we'll have a formal question and answer session that I will help moderate. So it is very exciting to be able to introduce Ted Ficken. Ted has a personal connection to the college. He did his PhD with us in public health. But he has a very interesting background that led him to that, specifically as an undergraduate and then as a graduate student to get his master's. He was at the University of Kansas, where he studied music, music education, and music therapy. So then he said, well, you know what? With the power of music, maybe it could also be used to improve people's health in people's lives. And so hence coming to our college, coming to public health. And so that is a very exciting, to me, potential application of music, something that we all know is very, very powerful in our lives in general. Recently, he's been teaching at George Washington University, so he's well known. He's got a whole bunch of books here that he's written, some about music and its relationship to negative things like hatred. And then other times, how music can also be used for positive things like health promotion. And so I'm very excited to hand over the mic to Ted to get us started. Ted, great to see you. Let's give him a round of applause to just welcome him here.
Okay, it's very makes me happy to be here today, especially on such a beautiful day. It's like I live in Salem, and it's been raining nonstop, and I love rain, but today is just a gorgeous day. I'm also proud that just this week, it was Damn Proud Day at OSU, so I'm damn proud that I did my PhD here 20 years ago. And also a week ago, it was World Music Therapy Week. So you'll hear a little bit about music therapy, but I can use this. So a couple of my initials you probably have never heard of. You know what a PhD is. CPHQ stands for Certified Professional in Healthcare Quality. That's a credential I have as a national credential. Those are the people that work in hospitals and healthcare organizations to improve quality. So they're always looking for things that went wrong and trying to identify root causes and fix them. And then this is music therapist board certified, licensed in Oregon. So there's about 76 licensed music therapists in Oregon right now. And there's a lot more in the rest of the country. So I show this for a reason. I started my music education in a church boys choir. This is me. And one of the boys in this choir became a very famous rock star. This boy right here is Lindsey Buckingham, who was the lead guitarist for Fleetwood Mac. So that's how I started to learn about music. Our choir director, the man in the middle there, used to take us Christmas caroling at nursing homes. And that's when I first noticed that music was more than just entertainment, that it could affect a lot of different things. He's still alive and still playing in churches at the age of 92. And I Zoom with him sometimes. So I'm going to be talking to you about hate music. And I'm going to be talking about it in different sections from a public health perspective, from a quality improvement perspective, from a music therapy perspective, and then probably my church music background. I'm going to talk some about love and forgiveness, because I'm going to talk a lot about hate. So this is my book. I have a couple copies up here, and after I'm done, you come up and you feel free to look at them. The book has an unusual format in that it has an introductory chapter and a closing summary chapter, but in between there's 14 chapters that are paired stories. On the left are stories from the hate music industry, some of the bands, some of the record companies, some of the movements, etc. And then on the right side, these are the backstories of music therapy colleagues and friends of mine. I have always known them as a music therapist, but I never knew their backstories. But the two pairs of stories in each chapter are related. So, for example, the one at the very top, it's about two bands, Jew Slaughter and Intimidation One, that were in Portland, Oregon. And I paired that with the story of Felice Walnut, who was a music therapist who escaped from Austria when the Nazis invaded and came to the United States, taught at a number of universities, ended up at the University of Portland, and then became a music therapist and worked for another 15 years with handicapped children. So I hope that gives you the idea. Each pair is for a reason, and I won't have time to tell you all of the stories, but I will tell you a little bit more about this story, Screwdriver and Valley Weigel, because Valley Weigel has a connection to Oregon State University. So this section, I'm going to go very fast. Don't try to read every slide, but I want to give you a sense of how present hate is in our current environment. So much so that the House of Representatives issued a anti-hate measure. This was back in 2019, trying to protect our basic rights and protected classes from hatred. This was not a law. This was just a statement of philosophy. But I'm going to just show you really rapidly a bunch of headlines. So hate crimes have been going up. Hate crimes against the disabled have been going up. The attack on our nation's capital had a lot of hatred on display. A noose, a Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt, which was a concentration camp during World War II, the Confederate flag, a lot of name calling, a lot of hatred addressed to Asians, being blamed for COVID. Hate crimes against immigrants, the whole build the wall and the crisis that we're having on our southern border. There's been a lot of victimization of immigrants. The LGBTQ plus community has been the target of a lot of hatred. Women worldwide have been the target of hatred and violence. Anti-Semitic violence has been going up. Mass shootings have been going up. I mean, we have mass shootings almost daily, and in some days more than one. Again, anti-Semitic incidents going up. The whole Stop the Steal efforts, election officials and their families have been threatened with hanging, firing squads, torture, bomb blasts, etc. So they're trying to scare off people that work in the polls. This was Juneteenth weekend a couple years ago. Juneteenth is a weekend when the emancipation of the slaves is celebrated. We had over 10 mass shootings just that weekend alone. This is over when we pulled out of Afghanistan. Even a folk singer was pulled out of his house and murdered for singing songs about in protest of some things. So again, each year the hate crimes have been going up. A hate crime is just like any other crime, except it has an element of bias. So if you attack someone because of the color of their skin, that could be a hate crime. If you vandalize a place of worship because you disagree with that religion, it could be a hate crime. That's been going up. When COVID slowed down, we saw an uptick in road rage. Murders have been surging. And I collect these headlines. There's a lot of them, so I deleted half of them for today. Even in Vancouver, Washington, they were distributing flyers blaming Jewish citizens for the pandemic. In California and up in Alaska and in other parts of the West Coast, there's been a lot of hatred expressed towards Native American women. They're disappearing and either never found again or found murdered. Some more, even in our state, race-based hate crimes against Asians. Now I'm going to slowly get into the music side. This is from last month. Spotify has an official Hitler radio playlist, and that racist and anti-Semitic music is being found on Apple Music, Amazon Music, Tidal, and others. So it's out there. And again, anti-Semitic hatred going up. This is just last month. We've had more mass shootings so far in 2023 than we've had in the past, 10 or more years. So a lot of hatred out there. This is from the Anti-Defamation League, and you can see they propose a pyramid of hatred and how it starts with biased attitudes, which we all have, depending on where we grew up and what our parents taught us and where we went to school. We're all biased in some way. But if you have biased attitudes and they start escalating into acting on those attitudes, and then it can be motivated up to violence and genocide. Probably the most well-known example for us is the Holocaust, where 6 million Jewish people and others were murdered. The pyramid of white supremacy is similar, and it starts with indifference and minimization and goes up to genocide. The reason I show you this is that as I studied hate music, the majority of it came from white supremacists. There are also Black nationalists, but the larger part is from white supremacists. This was a poster up in Portland, missing a future for white children. So there's a lot of people out there that are concerned and, in the words of one person, freaking out because very shortly, whites will be in the minority. So they're freaking out about how different demographics groups are growing and coming to our country. Here's a recent hate crime, which involved hate music. I'll tell you about that in a minute. This is the shooting at a grocery store in Buffalo, New York. Probably heard about. The flip side is love, and I will talk about that too. So, this is the pyramid of things that I believe can be more productive and lead to better lives for all of us. So let me talk about hate music. When I went to school to become a music therapist, this was the textbook. This was a long time ago. And Ethayer Gaston was the editor of this book. And in his opening chapter, I remembered this quote: "Music is derived from the tender emotions. The vast majority of all music is concerned with positive relationships that draw a man closer to his fellow men." Notice women have been left out back then. Love, loyalty, patriotism, and religion, to name a few. But what about the non-tender emotions? What about depression and anger and hatred? There's music out there that expresses all of those emotions too. So back in 2014, I read this story. It was in the intelligence report of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And it talked about music, money, and hate, and how white power music was making a big comeback on iTunes. Uh, this is the first time I had heard of hate music. Given my music therapy background, I was using music to help and to heal and to improve life, quality of life. And I said, what? People are using music to spread hatred in the world? So I started studying it. So since 2014, I've been studying it in depth, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. On the Southern Poverty Law Center website, they have what they call their hate map. These are all hate groups that they are tracking and monitoring and studying. These are groups like the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, Ku Klux Klan, some militia groups. And you can see up in the upper left-hand corner, it says sort by, and one of the sorts is hate music. So these red dots are hate music groups that are being tracked. I called the author of that article, Keegan Hanks is his name, and I talked to him, and he said, well, most of the groups on our list are either record companies or groups that sponsor big festivals. He said, if you want to learn more about the individual artists, the individual bands, individual record companies, etc., you're going to have to dig deeper, which is what I did. So these are the hate music groups that they identified. And you can see they update it every 2 years. They have not updated it yet in 2023. And you can see that it's getting less and less. It's shrinking, not necessarily because hate groups are gone. It's because they've gone underground and they're much harder to track. You did notice that there was one in Oregon, Sulemoon Recordings. It was a online record outlet, and I'll tell you a little bit about them in a minute. So it's all over the country. Most of the ones on the West Coast have dropped off the list either because they went out of business or because they were pushed out of business by the local people. So what is hate music? There are textbook definitions, and it's a lot of words. I'll make it simple for you. Hate music is music that attacks a demographic group, whether it's attacking because of their race, because of their religion, because they're an immigrant, because they're disabled, because they're a woman. It's music that picks on an entire demographic group, not an individual. But outside of those definitions, I found as I studied it, these common characteristics. First, there's an outright statement of hatred about something. There's encouragement of violence against that demographic group. There's a lot of bad language, name calling, profanity, false stereotypes, things like that. That's the next one, perpetuation of negative or false stereotypes, and lack of support for following the law. So if you're going to assault that group, that's against the law. And then antisocial leanings. I worked for 25 years at Oregon State Hospital, and it's a forensic hospital, basically. So a lot of the patients were there because they were diagnosed with antisocial behavior disorder. So these are people with lack of empathy for others and no remorse for their own behaviors. So usually I would play some audio clips to let you hear hate music. I'm not going to do that today because I don't have time. But if you contact me, I can give you a list of examples. But I did find that hate music's not new. These are some examples I found in the sheet music historic archives, and you can find those at several different universities. So the one on the left had to do with a stereotype of what a lesbian is like, sitting at her loom, no love in her life. Here's when President Lincoln freed the slaves. Now we're up to the Civil War on the left. You can see the N word is used twice in the title. Later in the 1800s, they used a different derogatory term for African Americans. Around the turn of the 20th century, there was a whole genre of music called coon music. And they made fun of physical characteristics. They made fun of their dialect. They called them lazy. They called them a lot of derogatory things. There were songs about the Ku Klux Klan. This one was actually against the Ku Klux Klan. It was used by Ulysses S. Grant as a part of his presidential campaign. This is the one on the right from 1898, was one of the first songs I found of encouraging segregation. Don't let white kids play with black kids. There's some more coon songs around the turn of the 20th century. Notice the one on the left at the top, it says the most successful song hit of 1901. This is before radio, before phonographs, records, CDs, etc., or streaming music. They also brought in Native Americans into some of this music. This one on the right is a Ku Klux Klan song in favor of the Ku Klux Klan. 1917, we're up to World War I. A song, anti-immigrant song. What kind of an American are you, and what are you doing over here? Now, my ancestors came from Germany in the 1830s, so they were getting a lot of pushback during World War I and World War II for being German. The Germans were our enemies. We're out to beat the Hun. Indians, again, false stereotypes, depicted as chicken thieves and alcoholics. I didn't find a lot of anti-Semitic music up until right before World War II. So this is back in 1934. This is out of the Jewish Virtual Library in New York, where they're already hearing a lot of anti-Semitic songs in Europe, and efforts are underway to protest the use of those songs. One of them is this song, which became the anthem of the Nazi Party. But let me come up more to the present. This is a quote from T.J. Layden, was in the military, and he used music to recruit people in the military to hate groups. And you can read his quote. So he was an example. He has now left that hate group and has written a book called From Hate to Hope. And he now speaks all over the country about how to get out of a hate group. So there are all kinds of hate music in all of the genres. There's racist songs and chants. If you remember Charlottesville, there were people marching and they were chanting, "Jews will not replace us." So chanting can be a form of hate music. A lot of anti-religion music, anti-immigrant, misogynist music, anti-police, etc. These are some names that have been given by different authors. Some call it hatecore music. Fast wave is music that's electronic techno music with no lyrics. They've tried to remove all African American and Jewish influences, but as the techno music plays, they play speeches by Adolf Hitler in the background. Porn grind is a very disturbing genre of anti-women music. And then there's jihadist rap music, not so much in our country, but in other parts. I found hate music in pop, rock, jazz, country, you name it. I found a little bit in each genre. That doesn't mean that the genre was hate music. It means that a little part of that genre could be had those elements in it. I spoke at Temple University last year, and someone said, well, how come you don't talk about all the anti-white music? So I added this slide. There is anti-white music out there. Here are some band names, and you can see just by the name of the bands why they're called hate music. Extreme hatred, definite hate, force-fed hate, fueled by hate, and also terrorism and assault in their names. Rahowa is is a band from Canada. I'll talk about them in a minute. Some more bands that are maybe a little more subtle. The first two, Jew Slaughter and Intimidation One, are from Portland. The most famous hate music band I found was a group called Screwdriver from England, led by a guy named Ian Stewart Donaldson. And almost everything I read, and I read a lot, mentioned Screwdriver as one of the big hate music. The lead singer died in a car crash, but ever since he died, every year all over the world, groups celebrate him, his birth, his death, and his music, and they cover his songs. Capitalist Kids wrote an anti-immigrant song, and you can see these other titles. These two I put in there because the majority of hate musicians are young men, probably between 80 and 90%, but there are young women. So those are two female groups that I studied. Here's one of them, Prussian Blue. A couple of sisters from Bakersfield, California, wearing their Adolf Hitler t-shirts. And they grew up with extremely white supremacist, racist parents and grandparents. So they started singing and pleasing those older people with their songs. They have since disavowed that. They said we didn't really know what we were doing when we were that young. They moved to Idaho, and they haven't put out any music for quite a long time. The other one is Heritage Connection, White Power or White Pride Worldwide, another pair of sisters from the South. They play at a lot of white supremacist rallies and festivals. Patty Tardington wrote a song about Charlottesville, and I'm not going to play you any of these because they'll take too long. Blaming all of Charlottesville on the protesters, not the anti-protesters, blaming the death of Heather Heyer, who was run down by a car there, on the other side when it really was a white supremacist driving the car. Capitalist Kids are the ones that wrote a song called Anti-Immigrant Song. Fang is a punk rock group from California. They wrote a song called Destroy the Handicap. I called and talked to the songwriter on the phone. He was out walking his dog. He had killed his girlfriend, went to prison. When he got out of prison, he is now working at a drug detox facility in Southern California that has a music therapist on staff. But he told me, oh, I just wrote that tongue in cheek. No one would believe that I really meant it. The problem is that there's people out there that would hear it and believe it and act on it. Johnny Rebel, you can see some of his songs. He wrote a bunch of racist songs back in the 1960s. They're still in use today. He also died probably about 5 years ago, but people are still using his music to motivate and energize racists. So here's an example. You might remember this was in 2022. 3 men killed Ahmet Arbery, who was jogging through their neighborhood, and they killed him. One of them had been sending a white supremacist song to all his friends, and it was a song by Johnny Rebel. So even when these people die and move on, their music is still here. And people use their music as a motivating factor. Ice-T put out a song about cop killer when he was angry that blacks were being killed by the police. He wrote a song to say, kill them back. It didn't affect his career negatively. Now he's a big star on a TV show. This is Rahowa. They were the band from Canada. And the lead singer was a man named George Birdie. He also was convicted of violating hate crimes in Canada, sent to prison. When he got out, the judge said, you can't be in that band anymore. And he had started a record company called Resistance Records. And the judge said, you had to separate connection with that record company too. He's still alive, still making music, but his music is no longer hate music. He's actually has a multiracial band that he plays with. But when he was ordered to get away from Resistance Records, some of his other owners of Resistance broke off and started Panzerfaust Records. They had something called Project Schoolyard, where they printed 10,000 CDs of hate music and distributed it to middle school and high school students free of charge. You also notice that some of these record companies have numbers in them, and 88 and 88, those stand for the 8th letter of the alphabet, H, so it stands for Heil Hitler. And 56 stands for the 5th and 6th letters, which is EF, and that stands for European Family, which is a kind of a code for Aryan and white. There's still a lot of record companies out there. I had no trouble buying CDs from these record companies during my research. I don't recommend that because it helps them make money. This is from 2004 when they put out the music to school-age kids. People just came out of nowhere and handed out these CDs. The owner of that record company said, we don't just entertain racist kids, we create them. Another example. Here's more recent 2020 and 2021. Neo-Nazis are using pop music on TikTok to secretly spread their propaganda. I'm not on TikTok, so I don't know much about that. I just got the headline. I think TikTok uses an algorithm, so if you start listening to hate music, they start sending you more hate music. The functions of hate music are to recruit members to hate groups, raise funds for them, teach their hateful ideology through music, which is important because a lot of people join hate groups not knowing the ideology. They're recruited because they just want a place to belong. They've been bullied, they've been neglected, they've been abused, and they grow up kind of angry at the world and angry at how they're being treated. And then a hate group comes and says, come with us, we'll take care of you. You can be a part of something important. You can have a place to belong. Provide a social setting. Now, what's interesting is some of these things are the same way that music is used for music therapists. Create a social setting for people to bond and be protected and supported. There is some dangers to hate music. Here's the gentleman who shot Congresswoman Gabby Giffords and other people. He was listening to the song Let the Bodies Hit the Floor and was a fan of Mayhem Fest. So he was being motivated and influenced by music. He was also mentally ill and also had drugs in his system. Dylan Roof, he shot 9 people in a historically Black church. He had been listening to a group called White American Youth, The lead singer was Christian Picciolini. When Christian heard about this, he was devastated. He didn't like that his music was influencing people to commit murder. He gave up hate, and he now formed an organization called Life After Hate. Holden Matthews, this is an example of arson. He considered himself a metal fan to the bone. That doesn't mean that all heavy metal music is hate music. It's not. Neither is rap music, but there's a little bit of it that is. This is the porn grind guy, Connor Betts. He killed 9 people in Dayton, Ohio back in 2019. You can see the name of his band and some of the names of his albums. Very ugly music about women and how to treat women. Jew Slaughter was Lamont in Portland, one of the members of Jew Slaughter, and actually he was also in Intimidation 1, both in Portland. He was this Sikh temple shooter in Wisconsin, killed 6 people. Very involved in hate music. This one's last year, less than a year ago. The Highland Park shooting, had been putting out murder music videos of his own using rap music. So it is dangerous. It's influencing people and it's motivating people. And some of them are mentally ill and some of them are on drugs or alcohol. This is the latest, the shooting, or one of the latest, the shooting in Buffalo. He had been inspired by Dylan Roof, who was inspired by Christian Picciolini's band. So in Oregon, I talked to Randy Blazak. He's the head of the Oregon Coalition Against Hate Crimes. He used to sing in a skinhead band, he told me. And he said he didn't know anything about Suleiman recordings. He's the one that told me about Jew Slaughter and Intimidation 1. Suleiman got in trouble for 2 artists. One was called Death in June. You can see the name of the album was Hylage. And also this artist, Boyd Rice, this is his album Hatesville. It has a song on it, Mr. Intolerance, and another song, Let's Hear It for Violence Towards Women. He has since dropped those artists. I'm watching the clock, so I want to go real quick through some of this. There's other examples in Portland. Jeremy Christian killed a couple of men on the metro. He was into heavy metal music and very angry at the world. So now I'm going to tell you that one pair of stories. Screwdriver is this band from England. Ian Stewart Donaldson was the singer. And then he had another band called The Klansmen. So here he is with a Confederate flag and someone from the Ku Klux Klan. He started off as a punk band, got involved with a far-right extremist group in England, became very popular. And I even found a book called Nazi Rockstar about him. So he was practicing back in the 80s and 90s and putting out music. And I'm going to tell you about the music therapy side because she has a connection to Oregon State. I was doing research and contacting some researchers in Austria, and it was about another music therapist from Oregon. And one of the researchers said, well, you do know about Valley Weigel, don't you? And I said, no. And she said, well, then buy my book. So I did. This is her book, it's titled Valley Weigel, Give Them Music, Music Therapy in Exile. So she was a musician in Austria, born in 1894. This is her and her sister. She's the one on the left. Her sister was a very famous politician, women's rights advocate, social democrat, and she was murdered in one of the concentration camps, Ravensbrück. But just this year at um, the Vienna consulate in New York City, they celebrated her life for all of the good advocacy work she did. But Valley, you can see as she grows up, she taught at the Vienna University's musicological. This is a couple of days after Anschluss, which is when Hitler invaded Austria. So here she is with her husband and son. They came to the United States to get away. Her sister was murdered in Ravensbrück. Valley then became very political. She joined the Friends Arts for World Unity. One of the other members of that group was Eva Pauling. That's her connection to OSU, where Linus Pauling has his archives. And I went to his archives and found a gold mine of stuff about Valley Weigel. She was writing him letters. He was paying for her to speak different places. They would send Christmas cards, some handwritten music manuscripts. So, you know, I found a lot of articles about her. Here's a letter to the editor in favor of the people in the South that were trying to register Black voters, the Freedom Riders. She did a lot of composing. And I actually found a book of hers on eBay, which is Songs for a Child, where she took famous poems and set them to music for children. I know I'm going really quick. She has her own page on the American Composers Alliance. She did a lot of speaking. She wrote some of you are, well, most of you are too young to remember, but there was a shooting at Kent State University in 1978. There were 4 students killed. There's a Crosby, Stills, and Nash song, 4 Dead in Ohio. But Valley Weigel wrote the music for one of the students' memorial service. Here she is getting an award from her publishing company for her music. She mostly worked in New York City as a music therapist with a variety of populations. Most music therapists specialize in a particular population of clients that they work with. She became a registered music therapist in 1958. Took a trip to Finland and started speaking around the United States. Here's the letter from Eva Pauling asking her husband to write a check for one of her speaking engagements. I found that here at OSU. Here she is speaking on a panel with Carl Orff. So a lot of people don't know about her. You know, she started giving lectures and speaking all around the country. I know I'm going very fast here. But this is the very first issue of the Journal of Music Therapy, Volume 1, Number 1, and there she is listed as a member in 1964. She taught at the New School. And here she is with Leonard Bernstein at a concert in Carnegie Hall that was the music of Gustav Mahler and the music of Carl Weigel, her husband. She also invented some musical instruments and got had them patented. And she passed away on Christmas Day back in 1983. So I'm going to quickly just mention this group, Life After Hate, so I can end on a positive note. These are people who got tired of being in hate groups for a lot of reasons, and they get help, and someone helps them get out. Some of them were hate musicians. Christian Picciolini was in a band, White American Youth. Arno Baikalis was in a band called Centurion. Tony McAleer was not a musician, but he set up the online ordering system for Resistance Records. So all of these, they call themselves formers because they're now got out of hate groups, which is very hard to do. Here's a picture of some of them. And it does include females too. Angela King was involved in a hate group and she got out. Now their whole mission is to help people get out of hate groups. Here's a couple of their books. From Hate to Hope, My Life After Hate, A Recovering Skinhead. Tony McAleer's book came out last year, The Cure for Hate. And this one came out last year too. This was a female version, one of the first I found. Walking Away from Hate. This woman was recruited into hate groups and was involved in them for like over a decade. Her mother never gave up on her, and eventually she came out of the hate group. My book is now on their resource list for mental health professionals. So this is well, you can't see the lines, but it's an Ishikawa diagram, which also called a fishbone diagram. So normally there's lines connecting all these that look like fishbones. And these are how complex hate music is. It has to do with early childhood trauma, mental health issues and substance abuse, what they learned in their home, propaganda, misinformation that they have been taught, politics, the internet, fear of other groups than their own, and organized hate groups. So in order to, I think, to address hate music, you have to address most of these things from a public health standpoint. You also should know your own biases, know your own heritage, increase your knowledge of the heritage of others, disrupt hate at home, school, and work, eliminate microaggressions. Those are the like off-color jokes and using a word that offends somebody. And one way I encourage people to do as a music therapist is to write songs and compositions focused on the positive, focused on love. I brought a couple of books that people can look at. One of them I just finished reading is All About Love, which is a very interesting, well-written book, I think. Be aware of any hate music groups in Corvallis. Are there any venues where they're performing? Understand that it's free speech for the most part. It's not illegal, but understand the First Amendment and do all these things to address hate music, but also support victims. That's one of the most important things. And I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to go really quick. Hate musics are radicalized, and then they have to be de-radicalized. That's it.
Great. Thanks so much, Ted. So we only have time for a couple of questions, but does anyone here have a question or anyone on Zoom that they would like to address to Ted? Yes.
But it is something else.
Well, you can go ahead while they're thinking about.
So when the individuals who were doing the hate music and the transforms, did they do other things with their music?
That's a really good question. I don't think some of those people that I just listed that formed Life After Hate, I don't think they're still making music. Their mission is to help others get out of hate groups. So, but I haven't seen them putting out any music. Okay.
Other question here, yes.
Well, I was thinking about there's the music that itself is a message of hate, not which I've got so much of that. But with like the Taliban, music itself was hated for the very nature of it being music. I was actually in Kabul when Bin Laden was still there before the US came in, and cassette tapes were just pulled apart and were kind of decorating the gates to the old Soviet compound where a lot of people had fled from landmines and stuff. which just was just a really good visual of how music itself became something to hate. So I think there's so many layers to this, and you're focusing on how it's used really kind of as a tool and the message. And I couldn't help but also thinking Stravinsky's music wasn't all about love, certainly when Rite of Spring first played, because it jarred things, but it wasn't about hate. It's about a musical aesthetic. So I don't know quite how to ask the question, but there's something about music, the aesthetic of music, and the interest for this kind of not just intellectual but emotional attachment with music and appreciating that, but then using that as a tool for hate, which to me is so despicable. But it's difficult to separate that in people who want to see, like you said, in black and white. This wouldn't agree.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have thoughts about what you're reading.
I think it's a good comment and a question. You use the word despicable. That's how I started. What's wrong with these people? These are horrible people. But the more I studied them, I found they weren't. They, like I said, they had been abused, neglected, bullied. They grew up angry. And these groups came and say, oh, come on, we'll take care of you. And once they get in, it's hard to get out. It's kind of like the mafia. If you get into the mafia, you don't get out. So
I guess it's not the people who are despicable. It's this product that is used for despicable.
But what it taught me too, my research, is that people change. So as a music therapist, I get really difficult patients that are dealing with a lot of issues, and they change. You give them help, you show them love, you be respectful to them, and they get better and they change. Some people grow up and change what they thought when they were younger.
So Ted, related to that, could you, I realize we have just a couple more minutes, but could you give us a little bit more information about music therapy?
Yeah.
Some people think of music therapy as, you know what, in the hospital, there's someone playing the harp in the lobby, and that's music therapy. Other times, it's much more something that is prescribed, several sessions, an hour long each. Yeah. Maybe they're listening, maybe they're actually composing. So could you tell us a little bit more from the perspective of a therapist?
Briefly, music therapists are music students in college. They take all of the regular classes that other music majors take. I took brass class, strings class, conducting class, harmonization, voice. I took all the music classes, sight reading, ear training. But then they use those skills to address non-musical goals. So it might be to help people vent their feelings. It might be to help people with physical rehabilitation. Some of the people in my book, one of them works with Parkinson's patients. Another one works at one of the largest hospice companies in the United States, using music at the end of life care. One works at a Veterans Administration hospital with injured veterans, using music to improve their quality of life. So they work in a variety of settings. Some of them work in special ed schools with autistic children. The goals are to make improvements, either to maintain or make improvements in people that are having problems. They usually work with a team, a treatment team. So like when I worked at Oregon State Hospital, there was a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a nurse, a social worker, a music therapist, and we were a team, and we developed treatment care plans to help with various treatment goals. Music therapists use a variety of methods and techniques depending on who they're working with. They might use drum circles, they might use singing, they might use improvisation, they might use guided imagery with music. There's a long list of methods that I used to use. So does that help?
That absolutely helps. Yes, there is an online question that in Bergen's book, What the F? I learned that slurs, unlike most swear words, cause actual harm to the speaker and the hearer. They actually change behavior after people hear them. It would seem that using these words in music would be even more harmful and a critical health issue.
Well, it's not a question, but I agree with them. Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Yeah, that's a great comment because it gets at this underlying idea that I think Ted focused on, which is just the power of music. I mean, we see power in other forms of communication like writing, where it can be used for hate or it can be used for good, art, where there's art therapy. But music, there's something very, very elemental to the human body because of the rhythm, because of the ability to sort of chorus and chant back. And so I'm very interested in seeing how we can improve the public health aspects of music, using music for positive. And so if anyone here or watching this on Zoom or watching this in the future is interested in being part of that, feel free to contact me directly. I'm going to stay in touch with Ted and others who are interested in music, because I think that this is a frontier we really need to think about. It's a really exciting opportunity. There isn't a ton of money to be made like there would if it were a pharmaceutical, right, intervention. And so that's why we're going to need to, put in that extra effort ourselves. Thank you so much, Ted.
You're welcome.
Last round of applause.
Thank you for coming.